and I don't know why I keep doing this with my hands, but leaving so quickly from her home. So with the moving expenses draining her financing. Now, neither one of them thought that they were good enough each other. He has a large presence. That could have gone differently. Hey guys, welcome to my channel. If you have never watched one of my videos, I love books and makeup, so I like to talk about books and makeup, and I especially love to talk about great books that I've read while I do my makeup. Today, I'm going to tell you about a really amazing book that I read, and it deserves so much praise and celebration for its writing because it was so good. This author is a new to me author, but she's also a new to everyone author because this was her debut novel, and oh my god, it rivaled some of the books that I've read by seasoned pros. And honestly, I just can't wait to tell you about this book. This book is called What We Deserve, and it is written by Lizzie Stanley. I'm going to talk a little bit about the book and give you some background information on the characters in the book and a little bit of what the story is about and what you should expect before going into the book. I'm going to do all that while I am getting ready and putting my face on. The palette that I'm going to use is by Amor Us, and it's actually a makeup company that I have never used before, but their eyeshadow palettes looked so intriguing and they were incredibly affordable. The one that I'm going to use today, because I got a total of 4, is called Bad Blood, and I'm going to see what kind of look I can create with that. I just think that it is absolutely stunning, so versatile. I can see myself being able to create quite a few looks with it. So let's get into it and talk about this book, and let's get started. This novel starts in a flash forward in time. The male lead character, Eli, has just answered his phone, only to hear the frantic pleadings of his girlfriend on the other side of the line, begging somebody to get out of her house. He didn't know what was going on, but immediately he was on high alert, and he knew that she was in danger. He just didn't know what kind of danger. But he did have a feeling for who the source of that danger was. As he hit the pavement toward her house in desperate strides, he just hoped that he could get there in time. So without any resolution as to what happened after Eli took that phone call, the story turns to the present time, and you are reading in the point of view of Emily. Emily had just moved to a coastal town of Foxton-on-Sea, and she'd left everything behind in her hometown for a fresh start and a chance at happiness. But leaving so quickly from her hometown left her very ill-prepared financially, so she knew she needed to find a job very quickly. Aside from not having a lot of money, her ex Gav had left her with a shattered soul and a fractured self-esteem. She'd lost her sense of self over the 4.5 years that she was with Gav. And she knew that the only way to find herself again would be to leave everything behind. And it kind of made her realize even more how much she'd given up to her ex Gav. So when Emily happened upon a tattoo shop that just so happened to have a help wanted sign, she knew that this was just the kind of change of pace she needed. She'd never even gotten a tattoo before, but she had a feeling she really could vibe with this place. And she didn't really know much about tattoos, but she knew enough about being a receptionist after having many temp jobs, so she felt like she could at least qualify in that area. All she could do is hope that that qualification would be enough to get her foot in the door. And luckily for Emily, the owner of the tattoo shop, whose name was Leo, was just about as desperate to find a receptionist as Emily was to find a job. He hired her on the spot, not having really needed to hear anything more than the fact that she'd had some receptionist experience. And with the both of them eager to have Emily start working there immediately the next day, Leo took her around the tattoo shop and made quick introductions with the artists that worked there. So excited about the first day on her job, Emily wanted to make a good impression. She ended up arriving at the tattoo shop a little bit earlier than she was required to. The only other person who was at the tattoo shop when she arrived was Eli. Now, even though Emily had made quick introduction with the artist of the tattoo shop the previous day, Eli was the only one that never really met face to face with her. They never really got a good look at each other because Eli had his back turned, working on a client in his usual hyper-focused vigilance. But as they met each other for real this time, neither one of them could deny the attraction that they had toward each other, or the way that they both seemed drawn to each other so intensely. But even though Emily couldn't deny the attraction that she had to Eli, she knew she'd just gotten out of a 4.5-year relationship with her abusive ex. She knew the last thing that she needed was another man to potentially break her heart and leave her a fraction of herself yet again. She'd already made a promise to take back everything emotionally that Gav had stolen from her. Not only was Emily grappling with some of the things that she'd been through in her life, but Eli was also dealing with a lot of after effects from situations that he's dealt with. He had been divorced, and even though it had been some years later since his divorce, he still had some pretty heavy emotional scars from his ex. His self-worth had been at an all-time low because of the words that his ex had left him with when she divorced him. He knew the best way for him to avoid being hurt again would be to put up a wall. Never would he allow himself to become emotionally attached to anyone, and the only intimacy that he would allow himself would be a consensual one-night stand. He refused to get emotionally involved with somebody. On that note, I'm going to put my eyebrows on, and I will be right back. I'm back and I'm ready to talk about the rest of this book. Even though Emily and Eli both felt like they weren't really emotionally available to have a relationship, the more time that they spent together, the more they realized they liked each other beyond that physical attraction. And the more they felt drawn to each other in unexplainable ways. Neither one of them thought that they were good enough for each other, so they feared making the first move because they wanted to avoid the possible rejection. When they finally come together, their relationship journey is not as seamless as you would think, considering how strong their feelings were towards each other. Eli quickly learned that Emily had some deep-seated issues from some trauma that she had experienced before she'd met him. And he learned that that trauma was stemming from a previous relationship that Emily had had. And he realized that that relationship left her incredibly insecure. So he knew going into a relationship with Emily that he needed to have patience and he needed to give her reassurance so that she didn't run when she got scared. Emily's panic and anxiety surrounding her previous relationship had really crippled her ability to handle a lot of conflict that normal relationships have. She was so used to being a complacent person when it came to her ex that any sort of conflict was difficult for her to be able to handle. So Eli knew that if he pushed things too quickly in the relationship with her, that he was going to lose her. And as much as both of their chemistry was very strong with each other, they moved very slowly when it came to physical intimacy, because he wanted to know that when the time came for that Emily was doing it because she wanted to and not because she thought she had to. And while Eli felt that if he moved too fast that he would lose Emily, she also struggled with the fear that she was going to inevitably push Eli away with all of her issues. She thought that maybe her insecurities would be too much for Eli to deal with. And both Eli and Emily struggled with the thought that neither one of them were deserving of such happiness that they brought to each other. And they were desperately trying to hold on to that happiness because they were both afraid that it wouldn't last very long. But they knew how happy they could be if they just allowed themselves to be. But even with all of Emily's reservations about whether she was good enough for Eli, whether she should be in a relationship with him, she was surprised to learn how accepting Eli was of her and all of her quirks and all of her interests. Not only did he not chastise her for her nerdy tendencies, but he was incredibly supportive of them, and he even went out of his way to indulge her in them, which had been such a difference from the unsupportive ways of her ex-boyfriend Gav. What was even more surprising was both Emily and Eli had been told by their exes that their deal-breaking flaw was a flaw in which they shared. I mean, this flaw had been one that they thought would prevent them from ever finding someone to spend their life with. There were many times throughout the story where Emily had to catch herself for reacting in a way that she would have with her ex when it came to Eli. And that's where Eli's patience with Emily became so welcoming to her, because Emily wasn't used to having somebody be so patient with her and having somebody who was so accepting of her. Eli almost worshipped the ground that she walked on, and he made sure to show her, and she almost didn't know how to accept that because she was so used to being treated like dirt. I'm going to go ahead and put the rest of my makeup on, and I will be right back. I'm back and my makeup is done. I really enjoyed this palette by Amor Us. I thought the matte shades in here blended really well. They were really pigmented. My only issue was with the shimmers. I was a little less enthusiastic about those, but the palette itself is good. I'm excited to keep using it. Anyway, back to the story. Emily and Eli's journey was what you would consider a slow burn romance. It's because they both had that intense initial attraction to each other, but it took a while for them to develop a relationship. Both of them were afraid to initiate making a move because they were afraid of rejection, and they didn't know if they shared an attraction. They started out as good friends, and then they slowly turned into something much more. Emily's story was so relatable, and it was so heartbreaking because it hit very close to home to me, and I'm sure it would to a lot of women who've ever been in an abusive relationship of any kind. An abusive relationship does not have to mean in a physical nature. In Emily's case, it was very much emotional abuse. It was very much psychological abuse and verbal abuse. But the way this author portrayed Emily, I could feel her heartbreak. What I really liked was that the author, within Emily's narrative, she described something that abuse victims go through after the effects of the abuse. And what Emily's narration explained was that after her split with her ex-boyfriend, Gav, a lot of people would ask her, why did you stay so long? Or tell her, I would have never put up with that. And Emily's thought process was somebody who has never been held down by the chains of emotional abuse couldn't understand that it's just not that easy. She touched upon the fact that outsiders looking in really like to give a lot of unwarranted advice about what they would put up with or what they would deal with, but yet they had never gone through anything like that. And it's not always as cut and dry as soon as that first red flag is shown that you'd be out of there. An abusive person has a tendency to make you feel like you're almost stuck in that situation, as if you are less than the person that you were before meeting them, therefore keeping you in this vicious cycle of thinking that without them, nobody else would want you. And they have a way of degrading you to the point where you truly believe that you don't deserve anything better than the abuse that you're receiving. And I really appreciated the fact that within Emily's narrative, the author was able to describe so truthfully the after effects of what emotional abuse can do to a person, and how Emily had such crippling anxiety that people experience because it's that fear of, what am I going to do wrong next? It sets you up for this feeling of always feeling like you have to think 3 steps ahead in order to think about the process of what is going to make that person upset so that you don't get to that point. That can internally make you extremely anxious because it's very overwhelming and it's a lot of responsibility for a person to try and almost predict what is going to set somebody off. And that's what Emily was having to deal with in her previous relationship with her ex-boyfriend. That's why it was very difficult for her to kind of let herself be herself around Eli. I like to touch on this topic every time it comes up in a novel because I really want to bring relevance to the fact of how common it is. And I really think that the author did an incredible job of bringing such truth surrounding the topic. Being that this novel has a male lead character who is a strikingly handsome tattoo artist, naturally you would probably think that he's going to be a bad boy. And Eli is honestly anything but. He is such a refreshing male character in a romance novel. He was an incredible human being who was extremely patient with Emily and with his family and with everybody else in the story, and he was incredibly intuitive. The only fault of his was that he'd been riddled with a lot of self-esteem issues due to the words his ex-wife had left him with when they got divorced. And that led him to believe that he wasn't worth loving. The 3 men of the tattoo shop, Leo, Eli, and Dean, are all swoon-worthy. I found myself falling in love with every single character. I think the author did an incredible job at creating these supportive characters in the story who all had very different personalities, and you could tell they all had their own background story, and it left the reader wanting to know so much more about those characters. The author of this novel, Lizzie Stanley, is an author that I connected with on Instagram. She is an incredibly nice person, and I was excited to read her book when she was promoting it on Instagram. So I put it on my to-be-read list, and I'm so glad that I read it, but it's like I'm refusing to believe the fact that this is her debut novel. I honestly think that her ability to write a story rivals that of a seasoned professional who has released many books. You know, sometimes our natural tendencies as a human is to kind of sit back on the sidelines and see what other people have to say about that author or that book and wait until they've proven themselves through reviews and word of mouth before you take the chance on them. But I'm telling you, this author is not one that you want to pass up. This is an author who deserves for as many people as possible to read her book because it honestly was incredible. Lizzie Stanley is an author based out of the UK, although I can't say that she is a USA Today or New York Times bestseller. I know in my heart of hearts she will be. I will be saying that one day because I am just in awe by her ability to put together such an emotional story that really connected me to the characters and made me want to read more. I mean, I can confidently say that this book is one of my favorite books, if not favorite book of the year so far. What I liked as well was that within this story there were no unnecessary conflicts. Any conflict that occurred was because of a natural battle within the characters themselves. They were struggling to feel like they were worth loving. This novel is available on Kindle Unlimited. If you're scared of reading a book from an author that you've never heard of or a different genre than you're used to, then Kindle Unlimited is a great way to discover authors without the risk for the reader. You're already paying the monthly subscription, so there's no additional cost to you. You check out the book, you start reading it. If you don't like it, you don't have to continue reading the book. You haven't lost any money. You just turn the book in and you get another book. There is no risk. I know that in these videos, you only ever hear me recommend books that I love. And it does not mean that these are the only books that I read. I read a lot of books. I read a lot of books in between the books that I actually feature in my videos. And I'll tell you why. Because they are not all gems. And I'm not, for one, going to sit here on camera and bash somebody's creative work. So I only do videos on the stories that I'm compelled to and that I think are amazing. But that's why I love Kindle Unlimited so much, is because if I don't like a book, and there's many that I don't, no harm, no foul, I return it and I start a new one. It's that easy. But when it comes to this novel, I could not be happier that I took the chance. And Lizzie Stanley, you have a longtime fan in me, and I am excited to see Dean and Leo's story. If you've read this book, let me know in the comments whether you are Team Leo, Team Dean, or Team Eli. Just for the sake of this book, I'm Team Eli, but I can definitely see myself being Team Dean or Team Leo very easily if they have their own books. Thank you guys for watching, and I appreciate your time and your patience, and I hope you guys have a great week. I hope to see you in my next video where I'll recommend another book, do some more makeup. As always, if you have any book recommendations, let me know in the comments down below. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you haven't, and hit that thumbs up button if you like this video. And I will see you in my next video. Bye.